Hello, everyone. Today we're going inside the arena with Deika Elmi, the Vice President of Engineering at Goldman Sachs. Deika's views are her own. She does not speak for the Goldman Sachs brand or the company. In this episode, we'll chat with Deika and discuss how companies can integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, into their own values, the importance of a leadership role in supporting diversity within organizations, and how to overcome obstacles and bring inclusivity into your own life to succeed. Own the Arena is a retained search firm that connects top talent with world-class organizations. In addition to serving clients, we support candidates on the journey to discover their superpowers, map an organization that highly values their talents, and actualize their careers. At Own the Arena, we focus on jumping into the arena with you and supporting you in whatever journey you're on. We're delighted to be here today with Deika.
Hi, Deika.
Hi.
So nice to see you. Thank you for being here with us, and thanks everybody for listening. I think we have a really exciting discussion. So, Deika, I'd love to ask you the obvious question. What is it like to be a woman of color in tech? And with that, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and your career so we can get to know you in the context of the question.
Definitely. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Christine and team, for hosting me. And out of the arena, Own the Arena, I apologize. It is delightful to be here today, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to share my story and answer a few of your questions. So I've been in technology off and on for the last 27 years, but the interesting thing about me is that, or at least I find it interesting, is for the longest time, work was just a means to an end, and I sort of nurtured my passions and hobbies and interests, and I worked because you kind of need to work if you want to live in a modern Western society, but really everywhere. And then one day I just snapped to. I was having lunch with a friend and I was grousing about my work and my boss and whatnot. And she said, "What is it that you want at lunch?" Just casually like that. And I couldn't answer her question. And that sort of was a lightning rod moment, because it made me really pause and think about what I wanted and what was my purpose. And that's how the journey got started. I set some really small goals and objectives, and I just banged each one out. And then so they got a little bigger and a little bigger. So what I would say to people is, regardless of whether you're a woman or are part of a marginalized community or whomever you are, just get real clear on what you want and then just go after it. You might succeed or you might fail. It's 50-50. You'll never know unless you try.
It's interesting. I love what you said about you never really thought about what you wanted. I think more of us are in that position than actually realize it or know. You know? I mean, because you just get caught up in the cycle, I think, right? Work to live and off we go, and we don't really think about where we're going. I'm glad that you were able to break out of that. So I want to dig a little deeper. What was the first thing that you thought when you realized it and you went, "Oh, I'm going to start thinking about what I actually want"? What's the first thing that sort of came to mind? You said you set small goals. Maybe what was the first one? How do you actually get started down that path?
So I thought about it. I reached out to, the interwebs and all that the digital world has to offer to us, and started following a few people on YouTube that helped with sort of presence and how to present yourself. I took a wonderful workshop from a woman named Lindsay. Her last name escapes me, but she did these workshops with Google. Google has a series tailored for women called I Am Remarkable. And it was how to write your professional biography. And that was a useful but difficult exercise, because often some people, I don't want to generalize, but some people underestimate themselves. And it was actually rather painful. I had to think about my strengths. I had to think about what I'd accomplished. And out of that, I was able to craft out this amazing professional biography. So first thing I did is I posted that, and immediately, like, some of the responses and the outreaches from recruiters changed. And then the other, this may sound really simple, but I was wearing a nice dress shirt, but I had like a casual selfie on LinkedIn. This was in December of 2019. So I looked up professional photographers. I found one that was within my budget, and I met this gentleman at his studio, and I took a professional headshot that was well lit. And that sort of leveled up my game even a little further. So these were the first few steps. And then when I saw the results and the impact it had, I got a little braver and a little braver. And so it was gradual, but it was about just sort of stepping into your own power. I think a lot of people, and particularly a lot of women, can underestimate what it is they do. We're nurturers and multitaskers by nature, you know? And so what ends up is you just get caught up in all of it, and you're actually doing so much. So it's nice to have these moments where you can pause and reflect and crystallize just what it is that you do and how much you impact your life, the lives of others and organizations as well.
Did that flip a switch for you and make a light go on when you actually looked at yourself through that lens and started getting positive feedback, positive results, people making, constructive comments even, right? What did that feel like the first time?
Well, it was a huge boost in my morale and self-esteem, if you will. And then the same friend who morphed into a mentor, and then eventually now she's more of an ally and a friend, but still a mentor. She told me some very simple things that I would love to share, if I may, real quick. For example, she said she very much, thank you, believed in the MAC model for your career. So she believed in having mentors is important, but also having peers and allies that you meet with on a regular basis and help one another, reach out for help. And that's another thing that I discovered in this journey, asking for help, and why it's not something that weak people do, but it's actually what most leaders do. And champions. A champion could also be considered an executive sponsor. And I'd never heard of any of this. This friend of mine was so on the ball that not only did she have her career, but she had the next 3 years mapped up, the next 5 years. And she said, sometimes these plans changed, but she committed it all to writing. She had a plan, right? So it took me a while, but I got my first mentor, and now I have 2 mentors and 8 allies, and I even have an executive sponsor. So these were things that I'd never really stopped to think about when I was younger. And as I grew older and, my skill set and experience became broader and more expansive, I guess the teachers come when you're ready. I know that sounds a little banal, but it really is true.
Yeah, and that's a big part of what we're trying to help people with at Own the Arena is something that you've accomplished and articulated so well, is that, hey, you don't have to go alone, right? You may have realized, I want to make a big change, or just started on this journey of discovering who you are, writing your professional biography, getting your first headshot, whatever it is. And we're all here to help support. We've all, in some way, shape, or form, been in those shoes. And as Rachel sort of coined the phrase, we jump into the arena with you so that you're not alone, right? And we're certainly not going to be the people in the cheap seats in the audience going, don't do that, don't do that. We're in there trying and going as well. So that's super fun. Let's see, you mentioned 2019. So I want to ask you a question about the workplace, right? And everything that's sort of changed with the pandemic. Do you think that the pandemic has had any sort of impact on DEI or opportunities for folks who are marginalized? And if so, tell us more.
Definitely. These are clearly just my thoughts, but I think that 2 seismic shifts happened in the American sort of culture and society. One was the demise and the murder of George Floyd. That sort of galvanized a lot of people of color, allies, spiritual leaders, politicians, that something had to be done. And then I think also the pandemic and the fact that we were all in it together and our lives were in danger, to some degree created a sense of unity and cohesion in our culture. The other thing I think is that with these changes and with the fact that all of a sudden, work from home started happening, and many women and some men as well, do a lot of invisible work. And they, take care of their caretakers for their parents, and they care for pets, and they care for their children in the household. And so I think with the fact that many, especially people in technology and STEM fields, started working from home, it allowed us time to also take care of the things that we take care of and be less frazzled. And when you're less frazzled, you have the opportunity to thrive. So I think at least that's what happened to me and several colleagues and friends. And I also think that when you're not in the office and there aren't the usual sort of dynamics, whenever there's change, it can also be an opportunity. And so I think for certain people, I've certainly read articles about it, that certain employees were able to thrive more because there were less microaggressions, because people were being more themselves on the phone, or on Zoom, they were more relaxed. So rather than thinking of it as a hindrance, I think that the pandemic was and continues to be a great opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like, it takes everyone in the culture to create a shift. And you're right, the pandemic really created space between people, among people. We all became more human. We're sitting in each other's living rooms. We get to know the families and the pets and everything else, right? So you can't help but have that happen. So I wonder, have you seen anything thus far, any leaders really putting themselves out there when maybe they didn't have to, right? And making a stand for diversity and inclusion, or intentionally extending themselves in some way, shape, or form that maybe they couldn't at the office because they were too wrapped up in other things, or maybe they were trying and it just became easier from home. Who knows? But just curious.
I think that sort of media, and there's also articles and even books written about it recently, that companies and company leaders notice that when, for example, a board or senior leadership is more diverse and it looks more like its customers, firms do better. I can't speak for Goldman Sachs because I work there now and I'm really not permitted to, but I can speak about my former employer. They tied the bonuses. I worked for an automotive data software company. They tied the bonuses of all the leaders, including the people at the very top, to their performance of how many diverse people, and all kinds of diversity. So physical diversity, neurodiversity, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, sexual orientation diversity, and their bonuses, and their annual bonus and their commissions and whatnot was tied to their numbers. And the firm that I previously worked for brought in experts that looked at not only recruitment but retention rates, and they looked at promotions. And so there's been this sort of microscope over these things, because firms have realized that it's time. And I think, to be honest, that the tragedy of George Floyd's death had something to do with that. People wanted to do something, and they did what they could. And so in the last year or two, we've also seen women of color rise to the top of large companies. I can't remember if it's CVS or Walgreens has an African American as CEO, and the head of Netflix is a woman, and the Sunda docket. So we have our first Supreme Court justice, and she's also a person of color. So it's a time of change, and in some ways, despite the tragedies that we've undergone as a nation, it's a time to celebrate, because we were always told change was coming. Well, it's finally here.
I think what you're saying is just so important too. And I think since, when we had to go through that time of being in quarantine and experiencing all of these things on our phone, I realized that I needed to change a lot of aspects of myself in order to grow as a person, in order to grow my future too. And I started looking at, where do I want to work? Who is, representing the future? Who has inclusivity to all of their people, and how do they treat them? Not just another tally mark on a paper, but actual people, and actually integrating these talented, different, a wide range of diversity. I think it's just really good that we're changing in that way too.
It really is.
How do you think we can make it inclusive and safe? Down to the really subtle things, like not being able to pronounce someone's name. You have a pretty unique name, Deika. And you were straight up about it. I think in our first conversation, you said, "Hey, my name is Deika." Okay, like Deika cards. Okay, now we can go. Tell me more about that, because I'm sure everybody mispronounces your name unintentionally. So I'd love to hear what that's like.
Sure. And, I actually had an important lesson about that recently. There's a charity that I'm involved with outside of work, and it has to do with helping young girls and young women learn how to code. And so there's a lot of young engineers, and many of them are Indian, and they have very long names. And I, would sometimes butcher them. And a personal friend also volunteers with me there, and he said, "Come on, Deika, you can do better." And so now I try and create mnemonic devices where I write down the name, and I sometimes will spell their long, challenging name to Western ears and write it down phonetically. So, and it's true. If you can say Hohenzollern, you can also say Elmi. You know what I mean? So it's just a matter of familiarization of the ear, and also wanting to make a little effort. And I've been guilty of the same. There's a guy at the library, I also volunteer there, and his name is Shyam, and I might have called him Shazam a couple of times. But he still answered to it, and I realized it. And another thing that's really helpful is, this beyond mnemonic devices, is if you can associate an event or a thing with a person, something that happened, and that also makes it easier to remember. So I think we should all try to make an effort, including myself.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you when I'm recruiting and I get on the phone with someone and I think, wow, okay, where do I start? So, but I think it makes a difference to at least try and say, hey, I'm going to try to say this. I'm probably going to get it wrong. Please don't be offended, but let me at least try and spend the 2, 3, 5 minutes ahead of the call to actually phonetically sound out and make different sounds than I'm used to making, to learn and embrace and include people, right? All the way down to
All the way down to, sorry?
Their name.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I think people also, it means so much to them when you say their name right. Like, I get variations on the theme, Deika, Deika, Dekia, Dekiye, and so on and so forth. And I'm usually a good sport about it, but I had to come up with the Deika cards because it's literally a brainworm. Most people don't forget.
So I'd love to jump from that to make a little bit of a leap in going back to organizations. And I think we feel power structures and dynamics, group dynamics, a lot more when we're in the office 100% of the time, which a few companies are, many are not. Hybrid is sort of like in between, right? And then at home, it sort of breaks everything down in some way, shape, or form. But I'd love to hear, probably from the past, right? Any sort of power structures that you encountered. And what can you tell us about the importance of being able to navigate those, maybe breaking through the glass ceiling? I don't know which ones you want to talk about. I'm sure there's been more than one. But I'd love to have everyone learn a little bit from your stories.
Definitely. I think that, so while many people think that having the possibility to be remote 100% of the time is beneficial, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because if you're not in the office, you're not present. And if you're not present, you miss out on all those impromptu meetings, and, senior leadership could be visiting. This is from my previous life, obviously, before I joined Goldman, but our headquarters of the company I worked for were in Chicago. And if you were 100% remote, if the CEO or the CFO came into town and they just decided to take, that certain department or a division or a team even out for drinks, you miss out on that. So I think while it is convenient, even if you are 100% remote all the time, I think my personal advice is make an effort and show up once in a while, because you miss out on those organic, unexpected moments, that casual conversation by the coffee machine, someone remembering what you've done and then taking you out to lunch, and it could actually affect career pathing. That's my thought. So, if remote work works, and that you find that you are also making career progression, that you don't feel isolated or you don't somehow get, forgotten, that's good. But if you live and work, and this is advice that I'm giving particularly to younger people and women, if you live and work within the vicinity of the office, try to go in, if not once or twice a week, at least once a month, and show your face.
Yeah, I think that's it's good insight, and it's important. being seen and heard and valued is so important. I think just to anyone's core at work, right? If you don't, I don't know how you feel good about your work if you don't feel seen and heard and valued, right? And I think that the more we intentionally think about inclusion, and even down to the language that we use, we talked about people's names, but, terminology and things like that, being able to share that and understand it and talk about it so that it's broken down in case somebody comes from a completely different environment and they've never heard that word before, or they don't know what that thing is, right? I think that all of these things are important to think about every day.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's such I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I've ever felt excluded, but I've certainly in the past been the only woman in the room, right? I'm sure you have too. And then the only woman of color in the room. And it's, you get used to it, but the first couple of times it's a bit daunting. Do I speak now, or am I what do I do, right? And it's just a very odd feeling. I don't know if there are people in the world who never feel that way. I feel like we all do in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. What do you think?
I think everyone struggles a little bit with imposter syndrome, but what I ended up doing was my last position before I joined Goldman Sachs, the team I worked in, a security team, was very male heavy. I just used the fact that I was a woman and a woman of color, and I also have, while I was born in the United States, I grew up overseas, so somewhat international flair, and I just used it to my advantage. I told them things about my past. I told them about my culture, and in the small talk or before the meeting started, or what have you, and it was all always very positively received. And I think men, especially men in leadership, are acutely aware of some of the imbalances. So if someone speaks up and cracks, not necessarily smiles, but, can have some moments of authenticity, it just lowers the discomfort level or the awkwardness. And I think in some ways it opens the door to more women and more people of color, including women, joining the ranks of management and senior management. So we're not representing anyone, but it's just like when you go to a cocktail party or if you go to church and there's like a coffee hour afterwards, there's always a little bit of awkwardness, a little bit of butterflies, but just speak up and relax and be social. And you'd be surprised how many walls that breaks down.
Yeah. And you speak, is it 5 or 6 languages?
Five languages. And then I understand Arabic and know some beginner Arabic. I speak like a Arab 4-year-old, but they can't talk about me because I understand what they're saying.
That's awesome.
How nice to be able to greet someone in their own language, right? Or to be able to break into a conversation after the meeting as you're walking through the hall, and be able to say something like, welcome, or I feel so welcome in your country, or whatever the situation is, right? Talk about inclusive. I mean, kudos to you. It's not easy.
Thank you.
So I hope
superpower.
Yeah, it's definitely a superpower.
Mm-hmm. Stepping into your power, owning your arena, all of it.
That's right. And actually, I gave some advice to some managers, not my previous job, but the one before, because we had a lot of non-native English speakers. And because my husband is a non-native English speaker, he's Italian, he moved here from Italy in 2015. There was someone at work, another lifetime, and he was having some communication problems. And I said to him, well, try not to speak anecdotal English, or try not to use American euphemisms and idiomatic expressions, because a lot of international people don't understand them. I think, ain't or gonna, or I can't think of the particular incident, but there was a huge misunderstanding. And it was because the person took whatever the manager said quite literally. And so when I have the opportunity, because I don't want to come across as a know-it-all, but if the occasion arises, I tell American native speakers, try to use just textbook English, because not everyone knows our idioms.
Exactly. And sayings and pop culture. I mean, pop culture gets spread around, but it isn't always received in the same way. So Fun. Tell me about, is there a way that you can kind of discover or sense if an organization has an inclusive culture? And do you look for that? Or, how does that fit into your spectrum of like, hey, when I decide what I want to do and, what goals I'm striving for, how does that fit in?
It does matter, and I'm very fortunate. In the last few years, I've been very fortunate to work for organizations that were diverse and accepting and had women in leadership. But in the past, because I'm interested and I work in cybersecurity, for a very long time, I was always the only woman in the room. But I knew it was going to change, and I'm someone who I always think I need supporters, but the biggest leaps and growth spurts I've had in my career was when I was challenged. So I worked for, years and years ago, I worked for a defense contractor, a very large one, and I was literally the only woman on the team. But instead of feeling sad or isolated, I was like, well, let me just show them what I'm made of. So sometimes frustrating situations, if you find yourself in one, if you can't change it immediately, use it as sort of a force multiplier or a catalyst and leverage on it, and you'd be surprised. So turn them into opportunities.
Yeah, and I mean, you as a leader yourself, right? Are there things that you do to foster inclusiveness on your team? Are there any sort of tips and tricks that you think really, I mean, you shared a couple already, like not speaking in idioms or slang, right? But is there anything really intentionally that you do, a practice that you've adopted that could help others?
I do. Unfortunately, because I can't speak about my current experience, but my last job, I had a team of a dozen, 18 people, a dozen and a half. And what I remember I told you that in 2019, I started this progressive growth and self-discovery. And it's amazing because you feel like it's a coincidence, but I think like when your mindset shifts, you actually discover things because you're open to them. And one of the things I found was, I still keep it in my phone. Basically, people love to talk about themselves. So if you're meeting with someone, whether it's a direct report and it's like, weekly one-on-one, or if it's a meeting, quarterly meeting, monthly meeting, but there's like 5 minutes before the meeting starts, or if it's a one-on-one with a direct report, while it's happening, take the time to ask them about themselves, because people often won't remember exactly what it was that you said, but they'll remember how they felt around you. And so I keep, Forbes magazine has an article called 10 Killer Mentor Questions, but I shared these with young people that I meet along my way who are interested in breaking into STEM careers. And they always, not all engineers are introverted, but many are. And they say, well, my biggest problem is I don't know what to say. That's when I tell them about the 10 killer mentor questions. And they're open-ended. And it's like, did you know you were going to end up doing this type of work? Or if there's two things you could change, what would they be? Or, what would you tell your younger self based on what you know now? And you would just be amazed at how people open up. The fact that, someone's interested in them and that they want to hear their story. So that's my trick. That's my secret.
Nice. And in terms of like companies, right? I know that this is, obviously a cause that you're passionate about. You're fostering DEI everywhere you go. It's just, you're effervescent. It can't be contained. But what advice would you give, earlier career managers and emerging leaders in terms of, creating inclusive teams and environments, and making sure that they're intentional about it? Because I believe that it happens if you're intentional about it every day. if you practice that every day as if it were yoga or something you were trying to learn, piano, something like that. You have to practice it to make it part of your life and to make it come into your consciousness and being, right? It's my opinion. But what advice would you give these early career managers around making diversity and inclusion a practice?
Well, this is a very big topic, and I know our time is limited. But one of the things that I try to remind myself of all the time is that to remember that everyone has some really important things to teach you. And if you enter, whether it's interviews, hiring interviews, or mentoring opportunities, or if you're just working with someone but they're more junior and you're helping them along, remember that they have important things to teach you. And I think that creates a mindset shift. Instead of being, well, I'm senior or I'm old or I have 30 years of experience, or even if they're older than you and they're maybe at the later phase of their career, it is important to remember that literally everyone has something important to teach us. And even just thinking that shifts your brain. Mm-hmm. That's the most important thing for me. And I sometimes have to remind myself of that as I'm, going through the sort of Sturm und Drang of daily life. And working, I have to remind myself that they could be an intern. They can be a junior staffer. They can be a very senior staffer. It could be even the housekeeping lady. Everybody has something valuable to teach us.
Yeah. And I think that's so beautiful, right? If you can go through life and hold that focus, because the busier we get, the more things that get thrown at us, the more time compressed things become, the more we're in our phones, right? To some extent, the less human we are, right? We forget about these things. And I don't think anybody intentionally does, but actually holding space and saying, I have something to learn from everyone. And maybe I even have something to teach everyone that I'm interacting with every day, right? Think
Definitely.
about how many interactions do we have a day? Tons.
Definitely. I would say one last thing about it. One piece of advice I would give literally anyone, including myself, is make it a point to go up and speak to people that are completely different from you. So if it's, if you're a man and you just work with a bunch of dudes, try to talk and meet at least one woman or a new female colleague per week. If you're an employee of color, make it an effort to talk to people that are not part of your community. If you're an international, candidate or employee, try and get to know some of the people from the place where you're working. But the way we'll break down these walls literally is by talking to one another.
Yeah, that's so important, because if you think about how many times, we're exposed in a sort of diverse environment, right? I mean, they're trying to get better at grade schools and things like that. But a lot of times, neighborhoods are, everyone looks kind of the same, right? And so the elementary schools, everyone looks kind of the same. And maybe in high school it's a little more diverse, and maybe in college it's a little more diverse. But, creating those opportunities for yourself to meet people from different places. I mean, and those of us who are lucky enough to have traveled, I know, Deika, you've probably been to more countries than I have, but to have traveled and embraced other cultures and been a guest in their country, right? And been the one that's like, I don't know where anything is. I don't know how any of this works. Somebody please save me. Know how it feels. And if we can be that for others, whether we've experienced or not, I think it's so important, right? To take the time and make the practice.
Yeah, respecting the culture is important. I moved here from Italy, and in Italy, everybody kisses people on the cheek. And the first few months I was in the States and I was a teenager, I would just go for that cheek, and people were like, whoa, what are you doing? So respect the local and try and learn a thing or two about the culture you're in.
Yep. And something that simple, right? Where it's just natural as a handshake, right? Great. Well, is there anything else you want to share? Any other story? We got to wrap it up. But I'd love to know if there's anything that you want to leave us thinking, and give
Definitely. Definitely. Thank you so much. I would say, despite all the bad things that are happening in the world, and I know, this is simple, but it's something that I think about every day. the world is full of good people, and change is always possible, and it starts in your head. So if you're not happy with your circumstances, my advice is write it down, write what you want, write, the current situation and future state that you want to envision, and then try to take small steps every day, even if it's just like I'm going to, think about it differently, or I'm going to try and, learn about something so that I can position myself for change. But be the change you want to do, be the change you want to be. It starts with you. And if you think good things are coming, they literally are.
Fantastic. What a beautiful message to leave us with. Thank you, Deika, so much for being here. It was wonderful, wonderful to speak with you and to see you. And I look forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you all. I really appreciate the opportunity. Have a great
Thanks,
rest of your
Deika.
Likewise, Deika.
Cheers. Bye. Bye. Thanks.